So this was round 4. I'm on 2.5 out of 3, and I'm paired against Grandmaster Camille Dragun. I think originally from Poland, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, Dragun's a very strong player. I don't think we've played before. I think he's close to my age, actually. I think maybe a couple years younger or so. But yeah, so in this game he goes e4, which was definitely a bit of a surprise because I thought he was mostly a d4, like knight f3 player. So I wasn't sure exactly what he was looking for here, because from what I saw, he didn't really play the open Sicilian too much. And of course, I'm mainly a Taimanov player. So yeah, I went into the Taimanov kind of blind, not really knowing what to expect. And then he plays this move c4. Definitely, I've always felt like this move had a reputation of being not that ambitious for white, or at least just leading to kind of like an equal position or close to equal position. Definitely not supposed to be super dangerous. But it also had been a while since I really looked at anything here. So it was kind of a good surprise weapon because I definitely, um, even if I knew he was going to play e4, I'd have no idea we were going to end up in this position. And yeah, I mean, definitely was kind of hard to figure it out of the opening. What made me pick the Taimana versus the other Open Sicilians? I'm not sure exactly. I just felt like it was kind of a flexible choice. This is one of the big differences between the Taimanov and something like the Con Sicilian. In general, I would say this one is kind of more flexible because you don't always want to play knight to c6 in these positions. But one of the nice things about knight c6 is that against c4, after black plays here, let's say knight c3 and bishop b4. So this is kind of the big difference. With the pawn on a6 and knight back on b8, white has a lot more options in this position. Whereas here, it's kind of awkward for white because we're threatening the e-pawn, bishop d3 hangs the knight, queen d3 runs into knight e5. So these are moves that white would have if we haven't developed. So this is why the c4 line is not as good here, because at this point, white's best is to take on c6, but that allows black to improve the structure with bc. And then this is kind of the general line, bishop d3, e5, and black is supposed to be totally equal in this structure. No, Pumpkin, I've been playing the Sicilian for like many years now, even like since before I became an IM. So yeah, I actually started bishop b4 checking the game. I thought there was no difference, but then afterwards I checked and it turns out like, I could try bishop d2 here. It's kind of a possible move. But we end up just transposing to this exact main line. Knight c3, knight f6. Now white takes and goes bishop d3. I played e5, castles, castles, and here he goes h3. So this is the moment where white kind of chooses a direction. It feels like bishop g5 is pretty popular. I think f4 might be a move, queen e2. And yeah, it's supposed to be equal, but it's one of those things, when you haven't looked at it in a while, it's like you don't really know how to play the position. So you're kind of on your own. You're not wanting to fall into any prep. So it was actually quite unpleasant to face this one. And they end up going wrong very quickly after h3. I mean, I don't know. The normal move here would be like d6. And I feel like if this was a blitz game, I would just play this one. But, somehow I was just like worried about like, oh, maybe he has some knight a4, some a3. I'm not really sure. It's hard to explain. I think this move is fine. I think black has a number of decent moves here. I think rook e8 is probably fine as well. I saw there was a Gelfand game where Gelfand played just bishop takes c3 and d6. Just very, very simple. And he did end up losing the game, but I feel like his position was fine. Something like this maybe be worth exploring deeper. But in general, I like positions where strategically I kind of have the superior position, like my structure is better, and feels like black has a lot of strategic upside here because white's pawns are kind of weak. So I don't think I would really mind playing this position at all. But yeah, over the board, I'm like not sure what he's prepped and what he's looked at, so it's kind of hard. Eventually, I ended up playing bishop e7 in this position, which I thought was kind of solid enough. And my idea is just to not get the bishop somewhat stranded. I was also worried a little bit about d6, bishop g5, for example, where if I go h6, bishop h4, it definitely feels like my bishop is missing from this side of the board. And yeah, I'm always very hesitant to play g5 in this kind of position. Now it resembles like an e4, e5 position, like some kind of Italian game or Ruy Lopez. But yeah, I'm always scared to play g5 here. Okay, so I go bishop e7. And my idea is just to keep the bishop on the king side. I want to go d6, bishop e6, and just kind of develop normally. And this was solid, but let's say a little bit passive. So d6, queen e2, bishop e6. I should note he started spending a little bit of time here, so it definitely felt like, yeah, maybe this wasn't the main move that he looked at, most likely, which was kind of nice, because now we can just get a position that we can play. So bishop e6, rook fd1. Here I play knight d7. I think this is the first time I'm making a somewhat committal choice. And the idea here is just to kind of trade off the bishops with bishop to g5. Maybe transfer the knight to c5, play for a5, and just kind of play the structure. Question, what about d5 in these positions? Yeah, I think black can play for d5, but generally white doesn't really allow it. Like here white goes queen e2. If I play d5 too early, I always have to watch out about stuff on the diagonal, or maybe in like rook d1 here, and it just feels very very unpleasant. So I'm never really sure about all this stuff. And then after bishop e6, rook fd1 again, like the rook is on the d file, and so it's yeah, tactically kind of hard to make it work. But if black can make it work, then this is a very typical equalizing break. So it's definitely an idea that black always wants to kind of keep in the back of their mind. So knight d7, and here I remember my opponent really went into the tank, and he spent a lot of time here and ends up playing queen to d2, which I thought was quite a natural move. He's like stopping bishop to g5. I played h6 here to kind of insist on the idea, and he goes bishop e2, so he's putting pressure on d6 and not letting me play bishop g5 without giving up a pawn. As analyzing afterwards, I think probably just knight c5 here is just simpler for black. Let's say bishop e2 anyway, and then a5. And I think hard for white to really do much. I mean, it's a slow game. I'm pretty much never worried about bishop c5, because then we get all the dark squares. And white's knight on c3 has a hard time going somewhere. And then we have like a million moves here. Queen c7, a4, rook d8. It's pretty straightforward for black to play. Probably black is worse, but I think pretty solid overall. So h6, bishop e2. Now I think it wasn't too late for like knight c5 or a5 here. But I had a kind of a different idea in mind, so I go queen b8. And here what I'm trying to do is just kind of trying to be flexible. I didn't really want to commit to a5, although it was probably fine. And I'm setting up maybe knight c5, maybe knight b6, maybe rook d8, maybe bishop d8 in some position to transfer the bishop. I didn't like queen c7 because of rook c1. And then I always have to worry about some knight d5. Whereas here on queen b8, actually white could go knight d5 anyway, but I always felt like this would not be so great for white, because the bishop is trapped. I can give it back and snag a pawn, and then maybe play something like queen d8 back, and then I'm getting the g5 square, and I felt like, well, material is equal, and I'm kind of getting the dark squares here. So to me, this looked quite fine, and white kind of lost the pawn in front of his king, so yeah, this looked absolutely acceptable for black. Instead, he goes b4. And this move was surprising for me, not because I thought it could take the pawn, because I saw that queen takes knight d5, of course, very, very typical Sicilian trick, and white just wins. But on b4, I was expecting to have knight b6, and so I was really unclear as to what he wanted against this one, because I thought I'm just targeting this pawn. If he goes c5, I can take once. Let's say bc, knight c4. I'm getting the bishop pair. To me, this position looked totally fine for black, especially with white's knight on c3, and it being dominated by this pawn. And okay, you can play rook b1 for like a single tempo, but I didn't really see the danger here. It felt like black should be totally fine. So yeah, then I realized he wanted to play b5 actually. So this was the move I really kind of underestimated. I don't really have a move other than knight b6, so I ended up playing it, and now b5. And yeah, I really pretty much just overlooked this move because, well, okay, c4 is hanging, but white is counterattacking c6, and it's actually very annoying. Like if I take on c4, white can trade, take on c6, and then this pawn is very annoying, and white has knight d5 coming, so I'm never really in time here to go after the pawn because of something like this. So this looked very, very sketchy. So after some time, I end up playing c5, which is probably not great. I mean, it's the move you really want to play because you don't want to let white take on c6 and plant the knight on d5. But still, after c5, I think white just gets a very clean edge, and something like rook c8 was better. And this is just kind of my own bias about about chess. I don't like having weaknesses, and here it's like I have to defend more squares, it seems. But knight d5, queen d8, I was analyzing. It's not that bad. It's actually not that bad. White also has a weakness that they have to worry about, and as long as this knight on d5 is contained, then actually it's not that easy for white to put pressure on d6. And yeah, again, all of black's pieces are at least solid. But okay, instead I played c5, trying to keep things closed, but now white gets just gets a very nice strategic grip with knight to d5. Actually, the engine seems to think bishop takes h6 was quite strong here. And I'd consider this one during the game, because if takes, queen takes, this is super dangerous for black. White just all of a sudden gets like rook d3, rook g3, and black is just getting mated. You can't really go f6 so easily. And if something like queen d8, rook d3, bishop g5, there's rook g3 followed by h4. And if bishop h4 here, I think white can just go like rook d1. Putting pressure here, or threatening just like rook f3, second rook to d3, rook g3, and just mating. It's just black's king has no escape, just totally stuck. Like black, it's weird, but black's pieces can't really do a lot here because queen g5, there's always rook g3, and same for queen f6 as well. So that one looked very dangerous, but when bishop takes h6, I was gonna take on c4. At least this was the plan, and I didn't see why this is that dangerous for black, because my king isn't all that open, and I got the pawn back. The engine seems to like white anyway after like takes queen to c1, but I mean, I don't know. I didn't think it was that clear, and I don't think my opponent did either, because it feels like he definitely considered this option. So he went knight d5. Now I took with the bishop. Probably the wrong choice. I think probably taking with the knight is better, and keeping the bishop on the board and playing for f5. I was worried about bishop takes h6 here again, but I think it's not that clear here after queen d8 and this idea with bishop h4. At least the d file isn't open, so white kind of has less of an attack in this position. So the idea would be for black to play bishop h4 and then f5, and then possibly create some defense. But yeah, I was definitely worried about it. Although maybe that was still the way to go. So I take with the bishop, c takes d5, and I go knight d7. And yeah, with this move, I'm actually trying to get my knight closer so that I don't have to worry about all these sacrifices. I feel like black is just much worse here, maybe even almost like strategically lost, because white just has the space and the two bishops. I don't know. During the game, I thought at least I have at least I have something to play for. I can try to trade darks for bishops. I have the knight. I can play for f5. You know, what are you going to do? Okay, after some time, he ends up taking on h6, which was actually pretty surprising because I thought this wasn't quite working. But then when he did it, obviously I felt like, oh, I might have missed something here. So I don't really have another option. Queen takes h6 and queen d8. So this is generally black's main idea to defend, either bishop to g5 or bishop h4. Bishop f6, I think, is not in time because white just goes rook d3 and rook g3. I think black is busted. So I think queen d8 is kind of the only move here. But clearly he must have missed something. So rook d3 I thought was kind of the critical move where I got to go bishop h4. And here it's actually not that easy for black because for white, because with the knight on d7 I am threatening queen f6. There's no rook to g3 because the queen is defended. And so queen f6 is actually a serious threat to kind of stabilize. So I was thinking rook f3 maybe for white, and then again try to like double on the third rank. But black can go f5, and I wasn't sure what's going on here, but I didn't see how I was losing, at least. Because I want to just kind of play for something to f6. So rook takes f5, I'll take. And then if ef, queen f6, and I mean, if the queens come off, white I think has like a bunch of pawns, but a lot of these endgames might be problematic in the long run, because I feel like black gets good piece play and good play on the dark squares. So yeah, this one I didn't see why it's so bad. If rook d3 here and queen takes d6, then I think the plan was to play queen to e7. Basically just try to get the queens off. I think this is okay. If rook g3, there's still king h7 here. And yeah, white has some pawns for the piece, but I'm pretty much happy as long as I'm not getting mated. So I thought this was okay for black as well. He ends up going bishop g4, which I have to admit I did not fully calculate when I played this. But yeah, initially I thought I should just have some kind of bishop g5 or bringing the queen in. But of course the idea is to put pressure on the knight so that it's hard for me to get the queen into the defense, and also to play for bishop f5. And if I put my knight on f6, then I think he just goes here anyway, and then I'm just getting mated with rook d3, rook g3. So I'm pretty much forced to go bishop g5, queen h5. And here actually black had some options, but for me, I felt like this was still very, very scary. Of course, white's starting to take on d7, and if I take back, taking on g5. Question about that f5 line. Yeah, so if rook d3, here, f5, queen e6 check. Yeah, I'm not sure if this makes a huge difference. Let's say king g7, rook takes, we take here. Queen takes f5, feels like black is still... oh, this one would be hanging the knight, right? So let's say queen e7. Feels like black should still be surviving, right? Like the rook gets in. It doesn't seem like white has a lot of pieces to checkmate. Rather, white is going to be using the pawns, but yeah, the pawns are pretty slow moving. So to me, I would think that black is at least fine here. Yeah, knight f6 may be an option as well, although it always allows g3. So maybe not here. But yeah, in general, that would be an idea as well. So yeah, bishop g4, I go here, queen h5, and I end up finding an idea with king g7 and kind of going for it. As it turns out, actually, black had a couple moves. Like knight b6 could have been played, which is actually a very logical move, just getting the knight off of the attack. I didn't consider it that much, though, because I just feel like I'm going the wrong direction, and I'm going to get mated, like rook d3, rook g3, or bishop f5. to me looked super, super dangerous. But maybe it's not so bad. I mean, when you check with the engine, it makes everything look so easy. Like bishop f5, black can go king g7 with the plan of playing rook h8, and if queen h7 check, then king f6, and rook h8 is coming, and actually white's attack is totally stuck. It's just black is defending on the dark squares. So this was actually very, very playable. And if rook d3, I think the idea would be to go king g7 there as well, followed by rook h8. And if h4, I think bishop f4 and g3. I think there is a king g7 idea here as well with this kind of thing, where white's queen ends up kind of awkward. There's queen takes h4. Maybe best white can do is go for the endgame with queen to g5, but okay, black is always taking and essentially escaping into what looks like a very playable endgame, especially if the knight can get to e5. So yeah, this one was apparently playable, but I don't know, I was just worried about getting mated. I found an idea that seemed to work and went with it. So I play king g7 here, and threatening rook h8. So white has to take on d7. I go rook h8. This is kind of the idea. Queen g4 to get the queen out. Now rook h4, and white is forced to go queen to g3. Otherwise, I'm winning the bishop. So if queen f5, there's rook f4. And okay, the queen is trapped, and if queen moves somewhere, then queen takes d7, and we're a piece up. So queen g3 to hold on to the bishop, and now I can't really take this one on d7, but I can take on e4. And as a result, we end up down a pawn. But hey, we're not getting mated, and I felt like, I have some play on the dark squares. I got queen f6, maybe rook f4 somewhere, maybe the king moves, I get bishop h4, the second rook can swing to g8. So at least I have some play. In fact, it kind of looks like a Sveshnikov, where black is often getting this like massive pawns like f5, e4, and then has this dark square bishop. So hey, I'm not getting mated. I was happy with it, and so I just kind of went with it. But yeah, objectively, definitely wasn't the best choice. Anyway, so here he plays bishop c6, which I think was a very ambitious move because he's really neglecting his own defense with bishop c6, but focusing on pushing his majority. I felt like something like bishop f5 or bishop g4 would be safer, but bishop c6, rook b8, a4. I played queen f6, a5. And I mean, white has some very serious threats here. He wants to go b6, ab, and a6, and just promote the pawn. So yeah, objectively, I think black is in serious trouble here, but we were kind of approaching time trouble, and this is move 30. So I definitely felt like I had chances during the game. I ended up going king h6 here. So of course I have to unpin and get like bishop h4 or some play going. I didn't know where to move my king though, because I didn't want to play king h8, because then after bishop h4, queen f3, rook f4, white always has like queen h5 check as a kind of tempo. And then my king has to go back to the g file where I don't really want it. And I didn't want to play king f8 because then it kind of blocks the rook, and I want to be able to always swing the rook to g8. And king h7, just on general reasons, like I don't think I considered very much here because it just feels wrong to put the king on a light square. So king h6, white pushed b6, and I think pretty quickly played a6 here. I thought about bishop h4, but then I didn't like b takes a7, and I didn't quite see a good continuation here for black. Like takes, I think white can take on b8, make the queen, and if there's no direct mate, then we're just down a rook, and yeah, totally lost. So the engine actually finds this move, rook a8, which is very funny, that I did not consider, where pawn actually is just stuck, and then f2 is hanging, so it's kind of awkward for white. White can take, then we take on g3. Let's say white recaptures, and the idea is to go queen e7 and then pick up this pawn at the end. So it's kind of a funny resource, and then the position is like dynamically balanced, I guess. But yeah, I definitely did not just did not consider the move rook a8 at all. It makes sense when you see it, because if white moves the queen, then at least we get a tempo to attack f2, or we take a7. It's kind of logical, but yeah, computer move. So I played a6. I think this is the more human approach, just kind of trying to keep white's pawns blocked. He plays rook a4, looking to trade the rooks. I missed this move, but it looked quite strong. c4 just kind of felt like an only move for me to prevent the rook trade. Otherwise, black just runs out of material. And bishop h4 I think wasn't helping because queen f3 and I don't have rook f4. So c4, white plays queen c3 going after the pawn. And I decided to throw in bishop h4. And yeah, I actually wasn't sure how to feel about the situation at this moment. You know, I thought like I might be objectively losing, but it definitely felt like I have a lot of play on the king side. You know, I was expecting something like rook f1, and then I was going to go queen f4 to defend the pawn, and then like g3, rook to g8. I didn't really calculate further than this because I felt like, okay, this is what I have to do. If king h2, we have bishop takes g3, which is kind of an important tactic, and the rook is hanging. And there's like going to be rook e2 and stuff. But yeah, if not king h2, then at least I should be fine, right? That's the only move that could possibly, like, you know, just win a bunch of material. I think objectively white is winning here. It can probably push like b7 or something, threaten to promote, and I don't know. I mean, of course the computer can calculate this all very easily, but that was the plan during the game. He ends up going f3, which I did not really consider. And then when he played it, I thought, oh, this might be a really strong move. Because he gets a tempo on the rook, and then if I play rook f4, he can just take on c4 and just start trading off pieces. And yeah, if we start trading pieces, I'm just completely lost. But then I noticed I have rook g8, and he can't take the rook because of queen f2 check and queen takes g2. So that was actually kind of a nice surprise for me. And then I play this move. And at this point, we're definitely in time trouble. It's like move 33. I think we're both under 10 minutes here to get to move 40. So not a lot of time to calculate. If you see a natural move that kind of fits in with your general plan, works tactically, you kind of just play it. And I realized he could still take on c4 here, but I think I had already seen that I would have queen to g5 with a very annoying attack on g2. And then he spends a little bit of time here. He actually starts running quite low and then ends up playing rook takes c4. Yeah, then I thought for a little bit, but it just kind of double checked and looked like queen g5 was just ending the game because g2 is hanging and the rook is under attack as well. And so the point is the queen is tied down to the rook. So any kind of queen c2, I'm just taking on c4. Or queen d2, I can take on c4 here as well. Or queen c1, very important move. Again, I have to, only winning move would be rook takes c4, but of course it's good enough because g2 is still hanging. And rook d2 as well. Rook takes c4 and the rook is hanging on d2. So it's kind of bad luck for white, but everything just ends up hanging. The last line I had to kind of see is if g4, then again we're taking on c4, queen c4, and the queen just comes in to pick up everything. And it's just immediately lost. King g2, queen f2, taking on f3 with check, and then I mean, we can take the rook with check. I think we can also just like play for mate here with this. Rook g4 and just game everything wins for black essentially. So yeah, after queen g5, he thought for a bit, ended up just resigning because there's just no move for white. He's just getting mated everywhere or losing a full rook. And then queen c1, this endgame, I mean, it's really really hopeless for white as the pawns are never going anywhere. They're always just going to be super easily blocked. So no point in really continuing this way. So yeah, that was the game. I mean, I felt fairly lucky, you know, even without having to check with the computer. You know, it kind of felt like I'm probably was losing in this one, and it definitely was. In fact, even I think all the way up to here, white is still doing fine. He can play rook a2, which is kind of a hard move to see, but okay, makes sense. Defending g2. Then black still, the position is still very, very messy, but I think white is objectively still doing well. Probably f3 I think was the most serious mistake because it just allows black like rook g8 as kind of a free tempo. And yeah, I think this rook f1 line was still pretty not easy for white, but definitely giving white I think the best chances. So yeah, but you know what happens. I mean, it was a sharp position, and my opponent ran low on time. And he's a very, very strong player, but everyone is capable of making mistakes. And yeah, I think he just missed something here. Missed queen g5. You know, if I take on c4 first and then play queen g5, of course, white then has time to defend. So I don't know, but yeah, I was happy to get the win. Sharp game, you know.